Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Turning Challenges into Leadership Opportunities. This virtual event is organized by the International Hospital Federation's Women in Leadership Forum in collaboration with Alumni Global. Before we begin, there are a few housekeeping reminders. All attendees will be on mute all throughout the webinar. We encourage everyone to send your questions to our speakers using the Q&A function of Zoom. And finally, the link to the webinar recording will be emailed to you in a few days. And now it is my pleasure to introduce to you the chair of this session, Deborah J. Bowen. She's the president and CEO of the American College of Healthcare Executives and the president of the International Hospital Federation. Deborah?
Thank you, Eleanor. And I want to thank everyone for joining us today, whether it's morning, noon, or night. And that's obviously the advantage of having a global community of women. We're very glad you're here. And it's my personal privilege to welcome you to IHF's Women in Leadership Forum event. This is about our fourth event, and we're very glad to have you here. As you know, IHF is the global NGO, the voice of hospitals and health systems. And of course, we know that 85% of the workforce within those systems are likely women. Yet the C-suites and the boardrooms do not reflect that. So I think one of the many benefits of IHF is to have this education and networking. They say learning and leading go hand in hand. I'm a big believer of that, and I commend you for taking the time to invest in your own learning. The Women's Forum itself started about 1.5 years ago. It's a voice for women. We all know that having a seat at the table and having a voice at the table can be very different things. So we wanted to create a safe place to raise issues, share learnings, and hopefully create more opportunities for women to advance. The learnings that you are about to witness, I think, will hopefully help you. I hope you take notes. I hope you learn something, and I hope it energizes you in new ways. So here we are as resources, and as Eleanor mentioned, we will have this session available to you, but know that the IHF Women in Leadership Forum is also available to you. We'll have sessions at our World Hospital Congress in Dubai, and we also have had other webinars which you can find on the website. I'm especially privileged to thank Alumni Global for their support and partnership and collaborating with IHF, and specifically the Women in Leadership Forum on this event. The work they do in DEI is incredible. You're going to hear from some of the senior leaders who run the healthcare and higher education practice. And again, I want to thank them for sharing their expertise as we turn challenges into leadership opportunities for women. We also have some great speakers with us today. And they are obviously Owen Francis, one of the people I just mentioned with Alumni Global. And of course, Dr. Jackie Schleifer-Taylor is also with us, as in Captain Emma Henderson. She's going to provide a different perspective, being a captain for Virgin Atlantic, and of course, Frank McKenna, who is also the Global Managing Director for Healthcare and Higher Education. So let me tell you a little bit about the agenda for today. The agenda is Owen Francis, who's the head of the inclusion area, will provide an overview of the challenges of female leaders is in the workplace. So we're going to get grounded in a little data and research. Dr. Jackie Schleifer-Taylor will give a personal leadership journey in healthcare. We all know we have journeys to share with each other. And of course, Captain Emma Henderson provides a different exposure, obviously, being a leader in aviation. So again, I think there's other things that we can learn from other industries to help women as well. So I know this is an outstanding lineup, and I hope you enjoy your time with us today. So with no further ado, let me introduce Owen Francis. As I mentioned, in addition to leading Alumni Global and Higher Education's division, Owen is also the group's Equality, Diversity, and Inclusion lead. developing thought leadership events and consultancy around diversity and inclusion. He is a very busy person, as you can imagine, and also working with clients and candidates across a great range of sectors and geographies. And of course, we're interested, Owen, in learning from you, what bonds us as women and where some of these differences are. So let me turn the program over to you, Owen.
Thank you so much, Deborah, and hello everyone. I'm delighted to be speaking with you all today, and I'm very privileged to be involved in the IHF Women in Leadership Forum and to have a place on this stage as well. So thank you so much in advance for having me. My name's Owen Francis, and as Deborah mentioned, I'm a director here within the healthcare and higher education practice at Alumni Global. So we are a truly international executive search organisation, and we've been appointing senior leaders into the healthcare sector for a number of years now, with a real focus on diversity and inclusion at the heart of what we do. And so the theme of today in terms of women in leadership is one that is very important to me, both personally and professionally. And so I'm going to be speaking about some of the challenges that we see for women in the sector, and more importantly, what an equitable and solutions-based approach might look like, which takes into account some of these challenges, but focuses on practical and tangible outcomes for the future. So I wanted to provide a quick overview of my background. So I've been working in the field of senior executive search now for the past decade, the past 10 years, across a range of different sectors, including healthcare, higher education, non-for-profit, third sector, central government and commercial sectors as well. So as Deborah mentioned, I'm a fairly busy man. Alongside my role as director in the organisation here in terms of Alumni Global, I'm also the group inclusion lead for the business here as well, which means that I focus on driving best practice, both internally and externally for our clients, to ensure that the processes that we run and the senior appointments that we make are truly equitable and are always seeking to provide disruptive and innovative best practice ways of working when it comes to equality and diversity in leadership. So women in leadership is a theme that's very important to us. And when we talk about diversity, we can sometimes refer to gender as a singular block, as it were, a kind of a single strand element there. But recognizing that within gender itself, this is a hugely intersectional group, as we know, with a range of protected characteristics across the gender spectrum itself, including race, ethnicity, sexuality, class, gender identity, disability, and many more different strands. And because of this, we recognise that not all diversity is visible. And I like to think that my own lived experience is an example of this, which I'm happy to share with attendees today. So I'm from a transgender background. My pronouns are he and him, and I transitioned 11 years ago now and have found an incredible amount of value since then in being an out transgender man, so being someone that's very visible about my own lived experience. Whilst I am a white, heterosexual, able-bodied man, I like to think that my own lived experience allows me to bring a dimension of understanding and empathy, particularly around things like gender privilege. And I like to think that the task is actually on us as men, and me as a man, to play much more of an active role in the allyship and championing of female leadership. So I wanted to share my own personal story with you in that sense. And not sure about the attendee numbers, but it might be the biggest virtual coming out that I've ever done. So I feel like I've got that's out of the way now. So women are underrepresented in healthcare leadership. We know this, yet evidence on impactful organisational strategies and practices and policies that advance women's careers are actually relatively limited. Now, women currently represent around 71% of the global healthcare workforce and around 59% of all medical, biomedical and health science degree graduates. So We know the data, and we know that women are disproportionately underrepresented, particularly at senior and leadership level roles in healthcare. And so what's still lacking are the systemic resources which can firstly understand and interpret this inequality, and secondly begin to change and challenge this on a systems-wide level. And so what's the cause of this underrepresentation? Well, it's what I like to term a leaky pipeline. So what we're seeing is a range of contextual factors at play, which I've listed along the top there. It's not necessarily an exhaustive list, and I think there's plenty more as well, particularly since COVID and some of the challenges that have evolved around that side. But effectively, these contextual factors can result in things like a loss of critical skill and experience, and low morale, and increased costs of sustaining the workforce, and adverse impacts on healthcare and policies affecting women. And so the consequences of this leaky pipeline can affect not just representation and organisational efficiency, but also culture, morale, and belonging, and the ways in which women can develop or be brought into the sector and progress within that very sector. So we're talking about something here, we're talking about barriers, systemic barriers that permeate the very cultural fabric of the sector. So what's next? So in terms of the future and looking forward, we're expected to see around a 22% increase in global human capital wealth going forward. So this means that women will be critical in senior and leadership roles, and there will likely be a focused effort across a range of different international geographies to redress the gender imbalance that currently exists. And part of the problem that we have is that the research itself continues to focus on the gaps and the barriers to career progression, and not necessarily always effective strategies to advance women within the workplace. So what I like to think the crucial factor here is, in terms of driving change, is the difference between equality and equity. And this is something that I often speak to the many clients that we work with about. So if equality is about striving for equal footing, what this often fails to do is consider the factors at play for women, which often mean that equality that is not possible without recognising that structural inequality, particularly as it relates to gender, already exists. It's already there. It's already limiting. And so an equitable approach is instead needed, which looks at deliberate, proactive and targeted ways of advancing more women into senior roles. And this is often about moving beyond fixing the individual or micro ways of looking at redressing gender imbalance towards organisational level strategies and system level change. So tackling things like discriminatory attitudes in managers, for example, looking at workplace culture and better work-life integration initiatives for women as well. I found that certainly over the last 10 years, there's a lot of literature out there for female leaders, which I've read myself, or for women who are looking at how they might progress in their own leadership careers. And when talking about equity versus equality, I often think of the book Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg. I don't know how many individuals in the audience may have read that. So she's the former COO, as you probably know, of Facebook. So for those of you who haven't read the book, I can summarize it as a call for women to have what Sandberg terms the will to lead, i.e., if women don't have a seat at the table, they can fake it till they make it, and they can involve themselves proactively in what we might think of as dominant male circles within the sectoral environment. And so I think this hypothesis is somewhat problematic for me, at least, on a number of levels, but mainly because Sandberg seems to be ignoring some of the all-encompassing structural inequalities that exist, that have prevented women for centuries now in being able to have the same access to opportunities, to resources, to time, to organisational support. And so it's not just enough to lean in. That might be the title of a book that I may or may not publish in future, but there's something there. But in all seriousness, the challenges for female leaders often mean that organisations really have to adapt and be equitably focused on ensuring that women have the same opportunities to progress as men. And often this means proactively changing their own cultures to even ensure women start from the same starting block as their male counterparts. And it's also about recognising intersectionality, and that as half of the global population, there is a whole spectrum of intersectionality across race, class, LGBT that exists. Part of what we've done here within Alumni Global, and as part of the work that I've driven as our group inclusion lead, is developing some key mentoring and leadership development programs for clients over the years that has taken that same equitable approach that I've been referring to as its guiding thread, really providing tangible solutions and creating cultures of belonging for women, not just those that conform to diversity quotas or tick box exercises. So from an employer and organisational perspective, equitability is also about being flexible as an organisation and adaptive to the practical needs of women in order to ensure that people can perform their best and have the confidence and practical means to do so. Many organisations that we work with might wonder why they have a lack of female representation at board and senior level, yet they've never properly captured or crunched or interpreted the data that they collect in meaningful ways, or they don't have proper succession planning in place, which focuses on deliberately harnessing female leadership, for example. Another issue that we found is that women are not often granted the same levels of career or functional diversification that men are in both strategic and operational roles, which can then often limit their ability to demonstrate how they might successfully transition into what might be much more of a strategic and people leadership role at scale from an operational role. Next slide, please. So yeah, I think that's my my next slide. So I wanted to stop and pause there, as I know that I have limited time myself, but I wanted to make room for some exceptional women who will be speaking today. But before I go, I would like to thank you all for your time and for listening to what I hope was a helpful overview of some of the challenges for women and female leaders in the sector, and obviously very happy to take questions as well. But thank you.
Great, Owen. I want to thank you very, very much, first of all, for sharing your personal story and your virtual coming out. I think a lot of us who are on these webinars, we don't get a chance to really share something so personal. So I want to thank you for that, and I want to thank you for feeling safe enough to do that here. Yeah, I guess I'm curious, and obviously if you've got other questions in the chat, perhaps Owen, you'll stay on so we can participate a little bit with our attendees in the chat. It's so much fun to see all of you chiming in from wherever you are around the world. But as you look across the business sectors, because you have such a rich perspective from looking at different types of industries, is there any one thing that stands out more than others to advance women? If I'm either a woman looking to whether my employer is a good employer for this, or for a new job, or if you're giving advice to a CEO, what's that one thing that must be present to try and advance women?
Thank you, Deborah. It's a really good question, and as you might expect, it's one that I think is often quite difficult to characterise in a singular strand as a kind of either a quick fix, or I suppose one thing that organisations do that can advance women across the board, because I think the category women is one that is so intersectional and complex as well. If I think about one of the areas that we work in, I do a lot of work in terms of senior appointments in both healthcare and the higher education sector. So I work with a number of different universities as well. And actually, there's a number of universities that have developed some really good mentoring and development programs for women at mid to senior level and those that are looking to progress within their organisations. And they're the types of programs that really do drill both into how women can advance their CVs and interview techniques and confidence building and allyship, but then they also work in equal ways with the organisation, and they're all about being able to make sure that the organisation has really proactive ways and frameworks from an operational and strategic perspective in terms of the development of women. I've noticed that the higher education sector as well is very open to having honest conversations at board level, which I think the healthcare sector is sometimes catching up with as well. So it's the ability for the chief executive, the board of directors, the governors to sit around and say, right, we're not representative. Look at us. We are a group of white men. What's wrong? Because essentially the problem has to be with us. It has to come from leadership, and it's not just about unconscious bias training. It's about thinking about every single strand of hiring, of recruitment, of the talent pipeline. It's about thinking of your operations, your policies, your culture, etc. So there's some really interesting kind of introspective and very honest conversations that are often uncomfortable conversations. And I think conversations about diversity, I'm a firm believer that they should be uncomfortable, they should be pressing, they should be antagonistic when necessary as well. So I think there's a lot of that in the sector, which I think healthcare could borrow well from as well, actually, within certain international territories. And then I think there's also some really practical means around advancing women in the workplace that take into account some of the challenges that women face just on a very practical level, but go beyond maternity leave, for example. So there's continued thinking around how organisations can support menopausal women, for example, and women at different stages of their career or their life. And so it's really about drilling into that, and again going back to that equitable versus the equality approach that I talked about as well. There's no silver bullet, I'm afraid, Deborah, but hopefully that suffices as somewhat of an answer.
Yeah, no, it's very rich, and I appreciate that very much. I think I also appreciated what you said about leaning in. I think, it's often women to advance in their roles. It's often positioned like somehow we need to do more, or it's not necessarily your fault, but there's something about you that needs to change in order to advance. And I think oftentimes, like you say, there may be things, obviously, we need to work on ourselves. We all need to do that, no matter where we're at in our careers. But also, it's systemic change and really working from the top down as well as from sort of the individual up. I think both things really have to be in play. All right, so thank you so much, Owen. We appreciate that very much. And of course, hopefully, if you have a question for Owen, he can participate in chat once again. So as I mentioned, we have some amazing women with us today. And of course, many of you also joining us today online. I want to introduce to you Dr. Jackie Schleifer-Taylor, who's the president and CEO of the London Health Services Centre in Ontario, Canada. And of course, Jackie's going to share with us her personal leadership journey, but I want to tell you a little bit about Jackie first. So Jackie is a registered physiotherapist who has more than 25 years of experience in hospital leadership with a proven track record in strategy execution, currently leading one of Canada's largest research intensive teaching hospitals while remaining an active member of the Canadian College of Health Leaders. And of course, as a person who runs a professional society myself, I think it's really interesting to understand also the role of professional societies in supporting women. So Jackie, we're thrilled to have you with us, and I'll turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Deborah. I'm thrilled to be here and really feel honored to have been included in this panel. And I like the opportunity of thinking about my career path every now and again. I do pinch myself sometimes, but I can't think about my leadership path without ever thinking about my parents. And I just wanted to start by that intro with a story that they recounted to me when I was probably in my early 20s. They told me about my starting kindergarten, and about a week and a half into that experience, getting a note from the teacher requesting to see them. I had started kindergarten in Toronto, and my parents, by the time I had started kindergarten, had lost 2 children to developmental delay. And they had another daughter who at that time and remains differently abled. And we're really super excited to when I was born and to put their energy into seeing me attend school and just that launching of that phase of life. And so they were really excited going into that teachers meeting. My mom had been a teacher in her early life, and they imagined all of the wonderful things that teacher was going to talk to them about me. But what ended up being in the conversation was a caution to them about the fact that I was very much interested in saying, what are your ideas, Sally? What are your ideas, Jimmy? And sort of organizing my little cohort of kindergarten peers in every way imaginable, as my father told the story. And also, putting my hand up incessantly to answer the questions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So my parents, of course, because they were wise and hopeful always, when they returned home, I think my dad said it took a week to think about how to explain it to me. But essentially what they said was not what my teacher had said, which was that nobody likes a smarty pants. What they said to me was that they recognize how much I want to create space for others and I want to be helpful to others. But, sometimes in that eagerness to be inclusive, it can, in fact, do the opposite. So I tell you that story because my parents would say that I was a leader in kindergarten, and every signal that I've had in many, many instances that I don't have to tell any of you about today would have suggested otherwise to me. But at the end of the day, my parents always communicated their belief that myself and any of their children could actually fly. And so I think about my path to leadership, and I think about the gift I had of the parents I needed to have me where I am today. I think about them also because they were very clear about the role education plays in everything. Education, in their minds, were the opportunity door. And long before credentials were defined to me in the leadership sphere, I had such a love of learning ingrained in me and pursued that. So I wanted to just start by saying that there's something about leadership, I think, that starts very young for many people who just want to serve. And that's the lens I bring to it. And now I've said this, and Owen covered this so wonderfully, the concept of intersectionality and the challenges women face in leadership. And I really don't want to go into details of that for my own career, because I'd like to spend the time on just the reflections and perhaps advice about it. But you know that I would have entered my clinical physical therapist office on my first day of work and been redirected to the office of the rehabilitation assistants. I know you would know that I've entered many, many rooms and been quite literally invisible. And you can imagine on many, more than 2 handfuls of occasions, waiting to meet a leader and being the only one in that space, whether it's a hotel lobby or a waiting room, and that individual look around and not imagine that I'm there. And one memory of that strikes me is that, even when that happens, that person being told that I'm actually there and still not imagining that it's me. So I'm not going to pretend that those things at different times didn't, in fact, wound me, but yet here I am. So I'd like to focus on basically how I think I got here. My first advice of 5 would be to be always deliberate in seeking and applying your experiences. I think for women, forcing yourself outside of your comfort zone every 5 years at the outside is of critical importance. I think as women, we think about the ways in which we may not be good enough or the ways we might not fully compare, and then stay within a comfort zone and deny ourselves securing a breadth of experiences that for women in leadership become so important. I think it's important that we also use our intuitive sense that we all have to recognize when experiences might be diverse, but not necessarily along the typical leadership path. Because what women are so gifted at is integrating all of our experiences and bringing all of ourselves and those experiences forward to lead others. What happened in that kindergarten class, I don't doubt, has shaped how I lead today. My second piece of advice would be related to that, and that is to be your authentic self. I can tell you, as I've navigated and ascended in my career journey, I've had wonderful advice from many, many individuals who only want success for me about how I should dress and how I should speak and what I ought not to do. But I know that were I to have been unsuccessful at any given point, and there have been many, I would be more accepting of that lack of success, having brought just myself to the table. The idea that I would have failed at something and been following the direction or advice or bringing an alternate face to the table, I think would have been crushing. And at the end of the day, bringing your authentic self to the table brings the opportunity for the health system, in which I'm completely vested, to see the diversity that actually exists and to see that people speak differently, show up differently, are stoic at times and less stoic at other times. I think it's important to recognize that the health system around the world, all the systems, require authentic selves. The third piece of advice I would have is about ensuring that there's an intentionality and self-agency that you take for yourself in your career trajectory. The idea that others might set the path for you and see you in different roles of, lesser scope would negate the opportunity for you to have self-agency about your own career path. Advice is a wonderful thing, but if you have a goal and a purpose attached to your career mindset, then it's your intentional self-agency in achieving that goal that is the path that will probably most serve you. There's nothing more fueling than passion and fire for something. And my personal mission is to change the health system and to improve it and to serve most broadly. And leadership is a platform from which you can do that. I think in leadership as well, it's not just about the title you hold, it's about how you want to lead and the intention you bring to it. Leading can be about a lot of things. For me, it's about serving. But it can be a lot of different things to different people, and bringing that intention to it never steers you wrong. The fourth piece about my journey is the recognition that space was created for me, and my obligation is to create space for others. And I'm the first person to, at any table, recognize when invisibility is in play, or recognize when there are contribution barriers that inadvertent or otherwise that exist at that table, and actively create voice for others at the table. I think that the importance of mentorship is always stated, when we need to, as women, create opportunities for sponsorship. That's when it's a step in my mind beyond mentorship, and it's a opening of a door in a system that has doors really closed to us for many, many of the historical reasons that Owen outlined. And my fifth thought about my own leadership journey is recognizing early on that, and knowing this from my own lived experience, my own childhood, that perfection is unattainable. And I actually think the world is beautifully imperfect, and people are beautifully imperfect. And however you would define perfection, it can't be the goal in a leadership journey. Mistakes will be made, and empathy for yourself in making those mistakes is a necessary thing that I think women often underlook or don't take into account. I had a great colleague at a London Health Sciences Center send me this article recently. Mark Goldschmidt, a physician at LHSC, sent me an article, and it was entitled, "Medicine is not gender neutral. She is male." And within that article, which is a fabulous read, there's a quote in there that the authors quote Virginia Woolf, who once observed that science, it would seem, is not sexless, she is a man. And I thought about that article just on the weekend, because the irony is, of course, that women around the world are exceptional leaders of countries, leaders of science, the health system, etc. And many, many civilizations have been built upon matriarchy. And yet this construct, this thing, the very need for this forum is that leadership is often constructed in a male man framework. And I would just close by saying every day that I arrive at work and am doing what I love, I am woman. And I'm really appreciative for the opportunity to have been part of this panel.
Wow, that was terrific, Jackie. Thank you so much for sharing your journey with us. I want to explore something with you, if you'll indulge me. You mentioned something that I think a lot of women feel, and that is sort of the self-talk that you give yourself. When you feel the pain, you talked about it as pain, the signals that are either helpful or not helpful, and what that means to your own identity and the wounds that might get created that you have to overcome. And I'm wondering if you could share with us, but was there a moment where you sort of shifted your self-talk, or what was the inflection point for you that allowed you to sort of not perhaps overcome, but at least move forward in a constructive way toward your goal and toward your purpose? Is there something you could share with us about that point?
That's a great question, Deborah. I would say I at no point in time felt anything but I had a right to be at the tables that I've been at and that I'd earned it. And I don't say that as though I've never had a moment of doubt or felt self-conscious in entering a room. In fact, I rarely have the luxury of escaping that emotion of self-consciousness to even today. Mm-hmm. But I would be disingenuous if I suggested to you that I feel fully earning of the positions I've had the privilege to hold, including this one. And I think I'm solid in that because I know exactly who I am. I've had the gift, as I said, of an upbringing and parents who didn't require me to be anyone but who I am, and didn't suggest the need to be better. I have no desire for that. I think in a a leadership construct that it's male, it's about winning or being at the top. My construct is very different. And I've spoken to many women who don't need to be at the top. They want to contribute. So I don't know about there being a pivotal moment. It probably was junior kindergarten.
Yeah. Yeah, probably it was. Well, it resonates with me because I remember when I was applying to be president of ACHE and not sure about whether it was a challenge that I could take on. And I literally had to go to, I got a coach, and I literally worked with a coach for a year and a half to sort of revise my messages to myself about that role and my ability to do it, my confidence in doing it. And I do think it's something that women struggle with a little bit, because if you're men typically have more validation from the outside in, and I think ours has to come from the inside out. Hopefully it comes from the outside in as well, which is one of the great purposes of our forum today. But I think we also have to acknowledge that there's a psychology about it that I think is in play, that is very real, and requires work.
Unequivocally, Deborah, and I will say this, I feel incredibly passionate about the fact that women have to sponsor other women into leadership roles, because the signals are unrelenting about not being good enough or not belonging. And then layering in gender with intersectionality of, able-bodiedness, beauty, height, weight. I don't understand caring about women and not caring about Indigenous women, transgendered women, able-bodied, differently abled women. I don't understand not having that whole understanding of intersectionality and bringing that full power to women in leadership. So we have to be mindful that sponsorship has to look and feel and taste different for women over men.
Exactly. And to all you women out there, we are here for you. Now, I think the other thing you brought up, and I will get to our other speaker in just a second here, but is this notion about the difference between mentoring and sponsorship. And that's something that I do agree with as well. I see it in our own world that there's a distinct difference. I'm wondering if you could tell us, did you feel you had a sponsor, or did you have a mentor? And who was that person for you?
Okay, thank you for that question. I always love to give a shout out. My first conscious sponsor was Elaine Gibson. That's when I started my clinical practice in physical therapy many years ago at another great organization in Toronto, Sunnybrook. And the next conscious sponsorship I received was from Molly Verrier, who was the faculty, a great leader in 1,000 ways at the University of Toronto. And my next sponsorship was my first executive role door opened by Marilyn Bruner, the CEO then of Women's College Hospital in Toronto. And these three women changed my life.
Yeah.
So yeah, I have to, yeah.
The power of that is incredible, and I thank you for sharing that with us. So again, Jackie, we're all going to be on a panel in a minute, but thank you once again for sharing your story with us. So I'd like to move on now to Captain Emma Henderson, who is from another industry entirely. So we're very anxious, Emma, to hear your story. She's a former airline pilot, and she's co-founder of Project Wingman, which you can read about, but perhaps she'll talk about it as well, who's going to talk about, is aviation any different? So let me just tell you a little bit more about Emma. Emma Henderson she's been a active airline captain and flying career for over 30 years. That's a long time, beginning in the UK Royal Air Force and finishing at EasyJet. I think I said the wrong company name originally, Emma. I'm sorry about that. In 2020, in response to the global pandemic, Emma founded Project Wingman, uniting the airline industry to provide well-being to support the frontline NHS staff. And now your Project Wingman is led by you. You are the CEO, and we're super excited to hear about your journey, Emma. And is it any different in aviation than it is for those of us in healthcare?
Well, thank you for that. It's lovely to be here. And what fantastic speakers. I'm following a tough act to follow. There's so much I'd love to share with you all, but I wanted to start actually by touching on that a little bit, Deborah, and letting you know that actually only 5% of the world's pilots are women, and only 3% of commercial pilots, and when you come to captains, so the person who's in charge of the aircraft, it's 1.42% of all the world's airline captains are women. And this is a figure that hasn't really changed since the 1980s, which is a bit shocking, and none of us really know why, but we're all working hard to try and make that different. So although our worlds are different between healthcare and aviation, our challenges are very similar. So my own journey to where I am now has been far from straightforward, but actually adapting to the twists and turns is what's made it so interesting. And it's brought me to this place, opening doors that I never would have thought to have pushed on, and also understanding that some doors can only open once others have closed. So just to sort of give you a little bit of a background to my career, at the age of 10 in 1983, I watched Space Shuttle Enterprise land at Stansted Airport near London, flew in on the back of a Boeing 747. And that was the moment when I decided I was going to be an astronaut. So actually, I've never ended up going into space, and neither, in fact, did that space shuttle because it was a prototype. But I decided instead I was going to become a corporate lawyer. And I went to university, and while I was there, I discovered the University Air Squadron, which is something we have in this country as a way of taking people into the Air Force sort of at degree level. So I learned to fly, and I also met the man who's now been my husband for 27 years. And it will possibly surprise you to learn that what I then did next was basically finish university, get married and have babies. Not very role model-y, but that was what I did. So we then found ourselves having built a house. We had 3 children who are now all adults and live away from home. And we'd been posted with the Royal Air Force to New Zealand on a military exchange. And it was there that I took up flying again after an 8-year gap. And I returned 3.5 years later as a fully qualified commercial pilot. So I then spent 3 years teaching other people to fly, thanks to a scholarship that I successfully applied for. And my big break came at the age of 36 to join EasyJet, which is one of Europe's largest airlines, as a first officer flying the Airbus A320 all around Europe. I was working 600 miles away from my family, and I commuted by air. I adored my job. I absolutely loved it. And I overcame so many challenges on the way to becoming a captain, which was my ultimate goal, including my brother was paralyzed in a motorbike accident. Our house, my parents' house, caught fire with us asleep in it one night. I myself had a life-threatening illness that I was lucky to survive. And subsequently, I failed my first attempt at command, which was a tough thing to fail something for the first time at the age of 42. So after a lot of perseverance, I eventually then became one of fewer than 400 female airline captains in the world. So I became one of fewer than, at the time, 400 female airline captains in the world. That number's only gone up to 500 now. And that would have been the end of my story, except that 2020 happened. And as Deborah said, during COVID, I set up a charity called Project Wingman, of which I'm now CEO. And we united aviation workers to use the skills of grounded aircrew to provide wellbeing support to frontline NHS staff in the UK. So the charity is still running. We have 6,500 volunteers across the UK. We did have 2 lounges in New York City, by the way, and they've given over 50 years worth of wellbeing support, as well as serving more than 2 million hot drinks in 104 hospitals across all 4 nations of the UK. Our lounges have turned into converted double-decker buses, and we continue to provide this really vital support. I was made a member of the Order of the British Empire, or MBE, for this work in the January 2021 New Year's Honours List, which is an award given by the royal family. I could talk for hours about any of that, but there are 3 specific things that I really wanted to bring to the table today. So if I could have the next slide, please. The first thing I wanted to talk about is leadership. And as a pilot, I learned over a career that spanned 30 odd years how to lead my team every day with integrity, humility, passion, and authenticity. Now, yes, I also had to use my authority from time to time, because I was, after all, the captain of an aircraft and therefore responsible for the aircraft itself, as well as the lives of everyone on board. And these skills were learned really by, I learned my craft from the right-hand seat as a fully qualified but inexperienced co-pilot. And the best advice I was given when becoming a captain was to take 2 examples of someone I loved to fly with and work out why, and then to take 2 examples of someone I didn't enjoy flying with and also to work out why. And the idea was to take on the characteristics of the good captains and try never to behave like the bad ones. So I learned quickly that communication is king, or actually, because we're in a women's forum, communication is queen. So you can take 180 people to their destination and be 4 hours late, and I have done that frequently, low cost airline. But they'll all leave the aircraft thanking you if they feel like you've made them the priority and kept them informed of a situation they have no control over. So people generally like to be in control, and pilots really like to be in control. My husband will verify that. And we should never underestimate the value of good communication with our colleagues and with our passengers, or in your case, or the people without whom our jobs would be pointless. So in healthcare, obviously, it's your patients, your clients. So when my career came to an unexpected end, which was by my own choice, in September 2020, I was already running a large national charity, which is something that I had never imagined I would end up doing. And people signed up to support the charity, partly because they already knew who I was, thanks to a brief appearance in a TV documentary in the UK about what happens in a flight deck. And it was really important that I got things right, especially at a time when people's own leadership teams in their own airlines just weren't. So I took the skills I'd learned throughout my career and literally dropped them into the 3rd sector, listening to all the ideas that came my way, but not necessarily taking all of them on board, making sure that we are flexible as an organisation, we're good at communicating, and most importantly, empowering people to carry out the tasks they've either volunteered for or we've asked them to do. So I was also bold on the basis that if you don't ask, you don't get, as long as you are happy with the premise that there are no wrong answers. And the best example I can give of this really is that we were offered £80,000 of the 100,000 we needed to pay for our first converted double-decker bus, which is used as a mobile wellbeing space. And the rub was that the investor wanted our name to be replaced with theirs. And that wasn't the right thing to do for our charity or the people we were serving. So I thanked them for their offer, turned it down, explained politely why, and walked away. And we still got our bus and more, by the way. So on to the next slide, please. And I think this is something we all feel and all have felt throughout our careers, and that's imposter syndrome. So the only place I've never felt like an imposter was in the flight deck. I knew, even on my first day as a captain, that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I was fully trained. I was ready to carry the enormous level of responsibility that went with that. which is not the same thing as saying I thought I was amazing or that I didn't have anything left to learn at all. It's just that I'd worked really hard to get there. I'd failed my first attempt at command, and you only get 2 goes. And it was only through taking ownership of my own mistakes rather than blaming anyone else that I really grew into the kind of captain I knew I wanted to be. So in all the years I spent as a captain, I kept on developing my leadership style. You work with a different team every day, and it's different weather, and there's different airports and different passengers. But essentially, we're working in a safety-based, high-pressure environment, and we run our whole lives through checklists to make sure that we catch any errors before they happen. And my airline was also well known for its just culture, and knowing that I could file a safety report, so effectively reporting myself without fearing the consequences, gave me security in my role that I've always really valued. And when I suddenly became CEO of my charity and started having meetings with probably the kind of people that are in this audience, I often felt like a complete fraud. I was like, who am I to be talking to healthcare professionals about how a bunch of aircrew could look after healthcare professionals? It just didn't feel like I had to really brace myself for those meetings and psych myself up for them. And equally, every time I've received an award, and I've been fortunate enough to receive many over the last 2 years, I will always tell myself that it's nothing to do with me, and it's all about the hard work that other people have put in that has achieved everything that I was being recognised for, almost to the point where I felt like I didn't really deserve that recognition. And especially when the award was the MBE from our Queen. So, you know, I told myself and anyone who would listen that it was everybody else's thing to celebrate rather than mine. And women are really, really good at this. And we've got to stop, because we're worth it. Our hard work deserves to be recognised by other people. And whilst there's a need for sharing recognition, that is important to do that, we also need to accept the acknowledgements of our achievements with grace and humility, but still accept them. So if other people see the value in what we have to offer, we should too. And my message here is we are supposed to be where we are. And we have so much more to offer. So if I could move on to my next slide, please. I want to talk about support, and where do we as leaders go for support when the going gets tough? So this is something I've wondered since I was very young. I grew up in a Christian family and went along to church every week. And I often used to wonder who looked after the minister. Like, they'd be standing there looking, you know, teaching us wise things, and where did they get looked after? And then my dad became a minister. He was ordained into the church, and I discovered that actually there's a huge value in having a strong family around you to sustain you when times are challenging, and it doesn't necessarily have to be family you're already related to. So when you're in front of the people you're leading and your own circumstances are especially challenging, you can't buckle under the pressure. You can't tell people how you're feeling, because you're the person they're looking to for strength and support. You're the solid ground when your team's world is moving under their feet, and you're the anchor in stormy seas. And that's great, and it's an enormous privilege to be in this position as a leader, but who's your anchor and who's your solid ground, and who or where do you go to for support when you face your own challenges? And I was in exactly this position in 2020 when I was CEO of this massive charity doing amazing work and providing a safe space for aircrew to unite, put on their uniforms and find a sense of purpose when all their aircraft were grounded. Now, I live 600 miles north of the London base that I was working from. And when the company offered voluntary redundancy, and with the future looking very uncertain, I decided to take it, which might sound like it's something that's easy to say now, but it was the biggest and most difficult decision I have ever had to make. Choosing to walk away from a rock star salary because the rock star lifestyle that went with it was no longer worth the price tag took a lot of personal wrestling. And I'd worked extremely hard to get where I was, and a huge part of me worried that I was just throwing it all away. Where did I turn to? And in my case, it was my family, also my faith, both of which are personal and extremely private to me. But for you, it might be the same, but it might be something different. The important bit is to make sure that you have something, somewhere, or someone to turn to when you're faced with a tidal wave that threatens to overwhelm you, or a brick wall that you're struggling to bash through. It's equally important to be willing to accept help when it's offered, because we don't have to do everything ourselves. And I really love what Jackie was saying about sponsorship and mentoring. I mentor lots of pilots through their careers, but actually in describing it like that, I realized that actually it's sponsorship more than anything. And that's so, so important. So I've just given you a few snippets touching on a couple of things that I believe are important for us as leaders, and especially for females in leadership to have in our toolboxes to make us more effective, more purposeful, and more authentic in the way in which we lead. So I hope you found them helpful, and I'm looking forward to answering any of your questions.
Terrific. Emma, thank you so much for that. I can't imagine what that environment is like. I know what healthcare is like, but the command and control nature of aviation, I can certainly see. You've done, the other thing I really love about your story is it doesn't begin and end as one chapter, right? We all have different chapters in our lives. And even, I think there's a tendency for us to think, well, those opportunities are lost to us or gone for us, depending on your age or what you're doing in your life. But that's really not true, right? I mean, it has to do more with purpose and having a North Star, and it's probably never too late to make that transition. And you've done a marvelous job of that. I just want to explore with you one thing before we move on to our panel, and that is, it strikes me that you've had to work very hard. You talked about imposter syndrome and what that was like for you, but and obviously I love your concept of have a life raft. But I'm wondering, is there sort of any mantra that you had that you sort of said to yourself in those most difficult moments where the eyes were on you and they may not have been too friendly? Was there any sort of self-talk that you gave yourself that was relevant, that helped you?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I was very fortunate that actually, I think because I was already well into my 30s when I started working for an airline, which was, most of my colleagues were men, but I was the same age as them, and our children were the same age, and we all had mortgages, and we were all at the same stages of our lives. And I know that I didn't face the same challenges with discrimination in the workplace as some of my younger female colleagues have faced. Discrimination is alive and well in the airline industry, sadly. I didn't experience that personally because of my age. But absolutely. I think there's two things really. The first of those is that I really, really dislike going in the simulator. And that's a large part of the job as a pilot. We go in twice a year. We do 2 days on the trot. And that's where everything's going to go wrong. So that's where we practice our emergencies. So that's where your engines are going to fail. That's where you're going to get your miracle on the Hudson moment. And that's where you're going to have to deal with sick passengers or all kinds of things. And you have to just demonstrate that you're able to do that. And I knew that I could do it, but I just had this massive fear of going into the simulator because I knew that my license depended on it. And without my license, I had no job. And there's a sense of professional pride as well. I think women, we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to not just be okay, but we've got to be really good. And that really mattered to me. So I hated going in the sim. And a good friend, Johnny, said to me, what to do is go to the loo after the brief and then stand and look at yourself in the mirror and just look at yourself like this and go, I am strong and I can be successful. So I did this on the first occasion I was in the sim after I'd spoken to him, and I stood there silently saying, I'm strong and I can be successful. And I let out a little roar and then heard the flush go in the cubicle behind me, which was a little bit embarrassing, but it was a great strategy. And it genuinely, I mean, it was literally as tangible as that. I was forcing myself to remind myself that I deserved to be here. I knew what I was doing and there was nothing to worry about. And then the other thing, I suppose, was when I failed my command. I was 42 years old and it was the first thing I'd ever failed in my life. And it was crushing. It was humiliating. I felt embarrassed. I felt like I'd let everybody down, not just my colleagues and my family, but the whole country. You know, I just felt that it was the worst thing that could happen. And there was a great saying that I carried around in my flight bag afterwards all the time, which was the saying about the devil whispered in my ear, "You are not strong enough to withstand the storm." And today I whispered back, "I am the storm." So my mantra would be, "I am the storm."
I love it. I absolutely love it. We're gonna do that at the end of our webinar. We are
Be
strong.
careful where you roar.
Yeah. Good point. All right. Well, now we're going to invite our Emma stay on, and we'll invite Jackie back, and we're going to have Frank McKenna. Frank, it's great to see you. Frank is the Global Managing Director for the Healthcare and Higher Education practice. Frank, we're thrilled to have you here. And again, thank you so much for the collaboration with Alumni Global. We're thrilled about all of that. And I think one of our chats said that the conversation is like soul food. So, so that's great. So Frank, I'll turn the panel discussion over to you.
Deborah, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, wherever you are in the world. We've got a hugely international audience. We're very grateful that you've joined us. We're going to have reduced time for the question and answer session simply because we've had such wonderful, authentic and quite emotional presentations, I think, from Emma, from Jackie, from Owen, and from you, Deborah, as well. So I think we've all been enriched by the opportunity to listen and learn. But we've had some questions through, and I'll try and work through those as we can, and I'll try and involve the whole panel. One of the immediate questions that comes back, I think, both to you, Emma, and to you, Jackie, is this sense of holding yourself to a different measure, this yardstick of exceptionalism, of feeling that you had to do more to succeed. And I just wonder the sort of advice to your younger self for both of you, I guess, in terms of when things go wrong, and I think in any senior leadership role, whether it's clinical, operational, executive, etc., not everything is perfect. There are huge similarities, as I think some of the questioners have been putting through around aviation and health and medicine. But that sense of when things go wrong, I certainly worked when I was in the UK Health Service with a female colleague who I think had a significant hurdle and never quite got over the problem she encountered, where male colleagues toughed it out, just buttoned down the hatches and waited for the storm to pass. Where I think that this female colleague never quite recovered from the turbulence that she suffered. I just wondered whether you've, Jackie, Emma, you've got some reflections on that of how you sort of coped in those more difficult times. It's easy sometimes, sort of leading in positive sort of weather, but when things go wrong, how do you cope with that? Jackie, perhaps I can call you in first, and then Emma, turn to you.
Great question, Frank, and thank you. Emma, when you spoke about being where you're meant to be, I would say that's how I feel about leading. And Frank, there are many, many opportunities for reflection on failure in my own journey, for sure. And I found that instead of setting me back, I was very open with a trusted small circle of individuals who could help me unpack it. I think you lean into failure as a way of overcoming failure. Now, nobody wants 1,000 opportunities a week at that, but sadly, that's what we get. Because if you're really leading, things will go wrong, and failure is an imperative. I think what I've learned through my imperfections and failures has been I have to forgive myself first. People are so kind; they're willing to look past it. But the hardest, bar is actually forgiving myself first, and I have to tell you, throughout the pandemic, where decisions were on the fly, that's the thing I had to really dig into.
Jackie, thank you for that. Emma, your reflections.
Yeah, I think I agree with all of that, actually. And I think some of the strategies I employed, I suppose, I played the piano since the age of 4, and I used to play the organ for weddings and things like that. And if you make a mistake, you can't hang on to it. You've just got to move on past it. And it's the same in the flight deck in the sim. If you hang on to a mistake in the simulator when you're being assessed, you will never demonstrate that you're capable of operating the aircraft safely. So it's kind of about learning just to move on from those mistakes, and taking ownership of them as well. When I failed my command, I could have taken the company to a tribunal if I'd really wanted to kick up a fuss and pulled in all these reasons why it wasn't fair. And actually the stronger and better thing to do was to say, yeah, I failed my command. Nobody else failed it for me. I did. And by taking ownership of that, it made me a much better, stronger captain in the long run. And a very wise friend said to me, look, this will refine you. It will not define you. And I've carried that with me as well. I love the idea that our mistakes are actually what shape us into the people we're supposed to end up being, rather than become what we're known for.
Emma, thank you for that. Perhaps a more structural question now. It's a slightly larger one in terms of a macro level, but we've had an interesting question that's come through around advice for those in perhaps more developing countries or states, if you take Africa, the Gulf, Asia, where perhaps concepts around equality are not quite yet where they should be compared to some other territories. So your sense, I guess, both coping strategies for trying to carve out your own path in those situations, and perhaps Deborah, in terms of national leadership organisations or global NGOs, and thinking about the role of the IHF, where influence can be wielded to support the possibility to have tangible programs to support women's development.
Yeah, well, I think people in developing countries, and to be honest, even in people, discrimination is alive and well in healthcare, just as it is probably in lots of other industries. I hate to say that, but it's true. So I think we all need environments that are supportive. I love Emma's concept of a life raft. I think professional societies or NGOs can be also life rafts. And I think the trick is not only to find people who are like you or resources that can help. Mentoring, one thing virtual has done for us is it's opened up the borders globally. So, mentoring can occur virtually as it can be face-to-face. So I think that presents new opportunities for connecting with each other. So yeah, I think sessions like this are helpful, but finding other resources, through our websites can also be helpful. The tips today, I think, were enormously helpful, but I think everybody needs support. So if you can't find it where you are, I think it requires some intentionality. And as Jackie said, self-agency to really look to find it in other places. I mean, you all at Alumni Global have many things available to, as well. So and we can certainly populate some of those in the chat as well, but I just think it, takes a little bit more intention to connect.
Thank you. And just on an individual level, Jackie, Emma, I don't know if there's anything you would wish to add to that as well, in terms of coping in systems where responsiveness, willingness to reach out and offer support may not be proactively given.
Yeah, what a great question. And I appreciated Deborah's comments and the resources that I know Alumni Global has, but also IHF. I've been looking into those recently. I do think it's very important, not to underestimate the opportunity for reaching out blindly to individuals or organizations that you're actually not familiar with for help. Or for a community of practice to be formed. For individuals, we often think about needing to be someone, very important before you call someone else who, might not want to make time for you. I really don't know. It's not been my experience that people don't make time for other people.
Thank you. Emma?
Yeah, I think for me, it's on an individual level, it would just be about just to keep believing that what you're doing is right and that you are allowed to be in that space. And if you're in a culture where that's not as accepted as it is where we're fortunate enough to live. You know, we live in a very open society in this country. It's not the same for everybody everywhere, but you know, some of the biggest change makers in the world have done things very quietly and very slowly, and you know, it's like the hare and the tortoise wins the race. So I think it's kind of just to not give up, because that's not the example you're wanting to set.
Thank you. Jackie, you spoke about the issue of sort of invisibility. It was quite confronting to hear that, actually, but so thank you so much for sharing that. And Emma, working in an environment where such a small proportion of females are both either co-pilots or captains, I'm going to turn to you, Owen, actually, in terms of any comments you might make. I know we've been at a meeting where a very senior leader has said, what are two white men talking to us about equalities, about, you know, what do you know as two white men about that? The issue of invisibility, and I guess sort of, you know, the bravery of speaking up for yourself, Owen, what might you say around that?
Thanks, Frank. Yeah, I think it's always an interesting experience to be from a different lived experience background, but not necessarily have that as a visible characteristic, as it were. I think being trans is interesting as well, because you see that gender privilege exists in very real terms. You either lose it or you gain it. In my case, I've gained it. That's not why I've done it, by the way. But you know, you see that it's very real, and so I think that, Jackie, when you talked about, you know, going into a room and feeling as though you know, you're not seen, I think for me it was an experience of feeling seen almost overnight, to the point where the experience of not being seen previously as someone who was female in male-dominated environments actually became a lot more stark and a lot more prominent. And so I think there's a kind of a relative experience with trans where you do see that sense of gender privilege, and it's driven home that really does exist. I think there's a sense of creating space for others as well. I mean, I think as a transgender man, but as a transgender man who, you know, is not necessarily visible in my transness, I suppose, I think it's about being a really visible male ally as part of that, and recognizing that it's about giving women the space, and recognizing that actually with the lived experience that I have, I do hopefully have the ability to identify those spaces where women are not seen or regarded in the same way or given the same platform. And I like to feel that with the access to the privilege that I now do have as a white man, there's a really powerful tool that I have in order to be able to influence those systems and influence men in the right way as well. And so, you know, I think it's a really important thing, because this type of activism can't just exist within women's dialogues alone. I think we have to be on side in that sense.
Owen, thank you for that. I'm going to raise another question that's come through the chat. This is, at what point do we say no to men in terms of leaning in? Who might wish to take that question?
I'll start, and then others perhaps will join in. You know, obviously, no is contextual. You know, I mean, it kind of depends what the question is. You know, so I will say I'm not an overall believer that, you know, I don't know that you can get to inclusion and it just be about women. I'm a big, some of my mentors have been men, and they've been very effective mentors. So I'm not a person who believes, that men don't have great roles and can be great sponsors and mentors. But clearly, I think we all have an idea of where those lines might exist for us. And I would just encourage anyone who feels someone has crossed a line, be they male, female, you know, that, yeah, there's an expectation you need to voice for yourself that I think can be, you know, that can be empowering, difficult perhaps, but empowering when said.
Thank you.
I think I'd take that one step further almost, actually, and say that, you know, achieving equity for women in the workplace or in our world is not about disenfranchising men at all, because many men have been our champions. It's about making sure that we are opening up the other half of the talent pool that is disregarded when women aren't included. And actually men are absolutely a part of that. I've been championed by many men throughout my career because most of my colleagues were men, you know. So I also, by the way, have a lot of amazing female colleagues who I am in support groups with as well. But I do kind of think that, you know, I'm very lucky to come from a background with very strong, empowering, encouraging, supportive men. And it's not about men or women, really. It's just about the right person for the job. And if we disregard men, that's not equity. So we've got to make sure that we're including everybody, including men, in our quest for equality.
Emma, thank you for that. The next question, Jackie, I'm going to come to you if I can on this. This is about creating a culture where promoting individuals, a truly equalities and equity-based culture is really important. So that sense within your own organisation, as Deborah was saying, LHSC is a huge organisation. How do you feed that down the line? How do you encourage and then sort of require service leaders to ensure that in talent succession that they are taking seriously the need to create truly diverse teams and ensure that women are given true leadership and accountability roles at the earliest juncture?
Great question. But I'm going to sort of cheat and answer and follow up a little bit to a comment Owen made in the last question in this one. I just want to say, Owen, when you spoke about being seen and then there being, I interpreted it as a bittersweetness to that. I so resonate with that, because it's one thing then to think about males leaning in, for example, and to be at a table of women leaders, but be the only women leader of color. So there's so many ways we can dissect the question of equity and inclusion and who can be at what table. And I think that intersectionality is so vital to keep front of mind, because it's not, the starting point is male, female, gender identification. So I just wanted to say that, and to answer your question, Frank, it's early days for us at London Health Sciences Centre, but I can tell you, I'm not going to waste my platform without advancing this agenda. And one of the things we've recognized at LHSC is how easy it is to keep others out when the bar that we set and the lens that we look at that hiring bar is male, easy to say, easy to spell, names, years of experience without, in the Canadian context, for example, without thinking about prior experience assessment reviews. Credentials do differ around the world, but what are the experiences that people bring? There's so much to do, and we've just started that work, but I will harken back to sometimes you just have to open the door for someone and take that chance, because we won't catch up unless we accelerate this agenda.
Thank you.
You know, we can't, it has to be today, it can't be tomorrow. That's what I would say.
Thank you. Before I hand the floor back to Deborah to close, I'm going to ask each of Jackie, you, Owen and Emma, just advice to your younger self or advice to those on this seminar around what you would do differently, how to sort of to have that resilience, because I think all three of you have spoken about that resilience and determination to lead, but to lead compassionately and collaboratively. Emma, let me come to you, Owen, and then finish with you, Jackie.
I think I like to draw on my children's school motto, which is a French motto. Apologies to anybody for my terrible pronunciation, but plus est en vous just means more is in you. And there's so much more that you're capable of that you don't even know about yet. So just believe in yourself, and you don't need other people to give you that sort of your status in life. You know, it all comes from ourselves.
Thank you, Emma. Owen.
I think don't be afraid to be yourself. There's a lot of conversations now around being authentic to who you are. And I think for me, as a trans person, the person who I felt I was from the age of 3 or 4 was someone that I felt that I had to hide and that I felt very shameful around. I felt as though I had a sickness that was incurable. And that shame took so many years to unwind. And, you know, it's not the experience that will kill you, it's the shame that will do so. And so I think for me, it's just being yourself, being proud of that. And I never thought I would be proud, but I am now. And so, yeah, it's being yourself.
We're very proud of you, Owen. Thank you. And Jackie, finally, before I give back to Deborah.
My parents used to say hard is never easy, and easy ought not to be hard. And I would tell my younger self to pay more attention to what was truly hard and what ought to have been easy, so that I could have put my energies differently. I have to close by saying, though, how inspired I am by you, Owen, and you, Emma, and just the gratitude for this conversation today.
Thank you very much. Deborah, if I can pass back to you.
Great. Well, I hope you join me in congratulating and thanking these wonderful speakers today. Frank, Owen, for the support from Alumni Global. Thank you for that. And obviously, Jackie and Emma, I also feel energized and inspired. And I hope those who were able to join us today will also carry that forth. And I've learned a lot, and I've been reminded of a lot. Believing in yourself, it's okay to be authentic. Obviously, having support, whether it's your life raft at home or your life raft in professional community, IHF can certainly play a role in that, but others can as well. And failure is okay. It's okay to fail. You have to forgive yourself and move on. And it's what we do after failure that perhaps counts most. So again, thank you all for joining us. Thank you to Alexandra and Eleanor for the great support. We'll be continuing this conversation at the 45th World Hospital Congress in Dubai in November. You can look up the dates, or Ali can put those in the chat. We're also going to be sending out a survey. Please give us your feedback about things you'd like to hear more about, things we'd like to take a deeper dive on. That would be very, very helpful. I want to thank you for joining us today. And I'd like to close with us saying, we are strong. Everybody do that, wherever you are around the world, we are strong. So again, thanks so much. Appreciate all of you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.